Howdy folks, and welcome to the Hillbilly Kitchen. Today we're making homemade tomato soup. Now I'm going to go over all of our ingredients real quick and get this cooking, and then we'll talk about them a little bit as we cook. I have about a quart of tomatoes. I've got a kind of a medium small onion that I've chopped up. About 3/4 of a teaspoon of garlic, maybe a little bit less. I have a little bit of what was a spice blend. Normally I would just put basil in here, about a half teaspoon, but I couldn't find my basil, so I thought that was a good substitute. I have 2 tablespoons of flour, about a little less than 2 tablespoons of sugar, maybe a tablespoon and a half. And then I've got a little bit of salt, a little bit of pepper, and a little bit of red pepper, about a half, a quarter, and a little less than a quarter. And you can adjust that to taste. I have 3 tablespoons of butter, a cup of heavy cream, and I have 2 cups of V8 juice, and that's our shortcut and our secret to making this soup. So we're going to start by sauteing our onions and some of our spices together and kind of making a roux in our butter. Just add your butter in and kind of let your pan warm up with that in there. The spices, like I said, I'm using a spice blend. Normally I'd use about half tablespoon of basil. Could not find my basil. And this smelled pretty good, so I thought it would make a good substitute. My garlic is a little bit of minced garlic, the kind in the water. I've told y'all I used that before. But the sugar is kind of necessary with the tomatoes. If you don't put it in there, it's not going to have a real good flavor. I mean, the sugar really is more of a flavor enhancer, and 2 tablespoons of sugar in all this soup is not that much sugar. If you want to leave it out though, you can leave it out. I do recommend putting it in, and you can use some kind of substitute if you want to, or some other kind of sweetener, but you need a little bit with all those tomatoes. It just makes it better. The salt, just pepper, and whether you put the red pepper in or you use all black pepper, that again is entirely up to you, and it's to taste. And once you finish your soup, you're going to want to taste it and adjust it. The V8 juice has a little celery in it and some other vegetable juices, not just tomato. If you don't have the V8 juice, you might want to cut you up a stalk or 2 even of celery and put it in here and saute that in with your roux to give it that flavor, because that little bit of celery does make a big difference in the taste of your tomato soup. As far as tomatoes go, you can use a quart of your home canned tomatoes. You can use like 2 of the small cans of tomato, or 1 of the big 28-ounce cans, or just whatever. It doesn't matter. You can use whole, you can use diced, or you can even cut you up about 3 or 4 cups of fresh tomatoes. And right now I know a lot of y'all are pulling them out of the garden and you've got more than you can possibly use, and you're looking for a good tomato soup recipe with fresh tomatoes. And you can certainly make this with fresh tomatoes. You need, like I said, 3 to 4 cups. And we're going to make this a creamed soup, and we're using heavy cream in this. Now, when you are adding milk to soup, you have to, or tomato soup, not any soup, but tomato soup in particular, because of the acid in the tomatoes, you do have to kind of be aware of the fat content in your milk. You don't want to add skim milk into tomato soup. It will lump up and it is not good. If you only have skim milk, add some melted butter to the skim milk before you put it in and stir it up real good, and that will increase the fat content and prevent that. At the very least, you would want to use whole milk, and I do sometimes use half and half in my tomato soup. But the heavy cream is really better in this, and especially because we're only putting 1 cup with all these tomatoes, it accentuates the flavor, and it kind of cuts the acid a little bit, and it makes the soup much tastier. So our butter's hot. It's actually starting to brown. Let's get our onions and our garlic. Oh my goodness. And I'm gonna go ahead and put my basil or my green spice in there. I'm gonna save my flour, and I think I'm gonna go ahead and put my pepper and stuff in there. You can save the pepper and the salt if you want to until the very end, and you won't need as much. But I'm gonna go ahead and put it in here because I kind of want that flavor mixed in with my onion. And I'm just gonna saute this for a couple of minutes until the onions get a little bit soft. And you do kind of want this browned a little bit. That browned butter and the onions even being just a tiny bit brown is going to add a lot of flavor into your finished soup. Okay, it only takes a couple minutes, really, maybe 4, possibly as long as 5 minutes. It just depends on how much you want to cook them, but usually just 3 or 4 minutes, and your onions are soft. Once your onions get soft and everything is kind of, all your flavors and your spices are kind of meshed together, go ahead and add your flour, and that's going to make a roux for this, and it's going to thicken it a little bit. And you just stir the flour into that butter. Now, if you have a gluten allergy, you can use cornstarch or yarrow root, if I can get it out, to thicken this a little bit. You would just need about a tablespoon, and you would want to save that and add that to your cream, because the cream is the last thing we're going to put in. You wouldn't want to put your cornstarch in here. Add that to your cream and save that until the end. And you do want to cook this flour just a minute. This is basically the same way we make gravy. And if you don't cook your flour just a minute, you can kind of taste the flour in your finished product. Even though we're going to let our soup simmer for a little while, you still kind of get that taste in there. So you want to cook that flour just a little bit before we add anything else. Okay, now we're going to add in our V8 juice. And like I said, if you don't have V8 juice, you can just cut you up some celery and add it in here and brown it with your onion, or saute it with your onion. So add in that juice and stir that up and get your roux all kind of dissolved in there. And then go ahead and add your tomatoes. Now, I'm going to let this simmer for about 15 or 20 minutes. And then I'm going to puree it. If you have fresh tomatoes, you might want to simmer it 30, even 45 minutes, because you really want your tomatoes to be cooked well done so that when you puree them, your soup is smooth. Tomato soup is supposed to be a smooth, creamy soup. So now all we're going to do is cover this, and we're going to let it sit here, like I said, and simmer. Stir it occasionally because it might tend to stick to the bottom of your pot and burn, and you don't want that to happen. Burn stuff in the bottom of your tomato soup pot is not good. And all we have left is our sugar and our cream, and we're going to add those at the very end because they would make it burn easier and faster if we put them in now. While our soup is cooking, I want to take just a minute to share something with y'all. If you are a regular viewer of the channel, you know that I recently lost my husband, Brett, and you also know that there are some problems that I've had to deal with since that really are very avoidable and should not have happened, but you know, that's part of life. And whenever I feel like life is kind of beating me up a little bit, I always turn to Job in my Bible. Because if reading about Job does not make you feel better about your life or your situation, you have some major, major problems. Poor Job, what he went through, and he kept his faith and he trusted God through it all. And when we give our lives and our hearts to God, when we accept Jesus as our Savior, when we ask Him to forgive us and we really give Him our lives and we trust Him with our lives, we have to do it completely. We can't do it just part of the way or just in some things. And that's one of the things that I've had to realize this week. And well, this month really, but this week in particular. When we lose a loved one, a lot of times there are people who contribute to the circumstance. And maybe it's somebody doing something really evil, or maybe it's a very avoidable accident. In Brett's case, it was a doctor who could have definitely given better care, been more attentive, been more prompt with the care. And all these things would have, if they hadn't happened or if they would have happened better, they would have changed the circumstances of how our loved ones' lives ended. Maybe they would have been more peaceful, less painful, less traumatic, if everything had been perfect. But what I have found in the Bible and what I am coming to accept, trust, and believe is that no matter how it happens, it happened when God wanted it to. Now, that doesn't mean it happened how God wanted it to, because people do things that God does not want them to do. But the timing is God's. Job 14:5 says, "Seeing his days are determined, the number of his months are with thee. Thou hast appointed the bounds that he cannot pass." That means that God called our loved one home when He wanted them home. Now, like I said, it doesn't mean that the circumstances were ideal. And it doesn't mean that the circumstances were the way that God would have wanted them for you if someone hadn't done something that they shouldn't have done. But what it does mean is that it was in God's time. And when He wants His children home and He calls them home, they go. And the circumstances are something that we have to deal with, and we have to forgive. And once we accept that it was God's time, that it was God's will, once we trust that, then we can get on with the process of forgiving circumstances. And we can get on with the process of finding peace with that loss. And once we forgive and once we find that peace, then we can get on with our lives. And I know this is hard for people to understand, to believe, to process, but it is a disservice to the memory and to the life of our loved one to hold on to that anger and that hate and that unforgiveness regarding the circumstance, because they are home with the Lord and they are at peace, and God wants us to have our peace again. I don't know exactly who this was for other than me, but I do know there are a great many people who are having trouble dealing with the same problem. Even though the circumstances are different, the problem is the same, because so many of you have sent cards and letters and left comments and sent messages that say the same thing. The circumstances were not ideal, but we can forgive it. We can find peace as long as we trust that it was God's time. Okay, our soup has been simmering and it's thickening up nicely. Now, tomato soup is not going to be super thick, but it is, you do want it slightly thicker than water. Hard to dip a grilled cheese sandwich in something that's real watery, so we don't want something real watery. So our next step is we have to puree this. Now you can dump it out in a blender or run it through a food processor. You can even use an old-fashioned potato masher and just mash on it until you get it pureed. That will take a while. Out of all of my kitchen gadgets, oops, this one right here is my favorite, and it has a couple of attachments. It's just a little hand blender. I use the whisk on it to make whipped cream for everything. And when I got this one, they were only about $20. Mine is a Hamilton Beach. I had one that didn't even have any attachments. It was just a little Hamilton Beach hand blender, and I used that thing for 20 years. So they last a long time for not much money, and they do a lot of stuff. And I'm going to use this. I don't even have to take it out of the pan or turn it off. Once I start pureeing it though, and once you start pureeing it, it might start popping because it's going to get a little bit thicker, so watch that. And I'll tell you what, just because of that, I am going to turn it off, because if I turn it off, it won't pop on me so bad. Okay, well that took a second or two. That's probably close to the most time-consuming part of this. Of course, you got to wait for it to simmer, but... And I'm going to turn it back on. Oh, and I'm going to add my sugar. Now, I save my sugar until the end because, like every other spice, if you put the sugar in, the longer it cooks, the less flavor it's going to have. So you're going to need more. So save that till the end, and you will have to have far less than if you put it in at the beginning. And also, sugar tends to cause stuff to burn, so it will be more likely to stick to the bottom of the pot while it's simmering and burn if you put the sugar in earlier. And we're going to add the cream, and if you are doing the gluten-free version and you put your cornstarch in here, make sure you give it a little bit of a stir before you add it in your pot, because all your cornstarch will be in the bottom of your cup. And we're just going to add this in. And for this recipe, I would really use at least half and half. And now the only thing you have to do is kind of stir this until it comes back to a simmer. You don't want to boil it now, you just want to get it close to back to a simmer. And you can keep this warm in a crock pot or something. You could even make it in a crock pot if you wanted to. I would probably still do the roux and saute the onions and the spices and stuff in a little skillet and then add that to my crock pot. But you can put this in a crock pot and keep it warm all day long. Or you can leave it on the stove and turn it down on warm if your stove has a warm setting, and let it sit there and let folks come in and make them a grilled cheese sandwich. You know, especially around the holidays, if you got a big crowd of people, as people get hungry, they can make them a grilled cheese sandwich or something. Or if you've got some cheese bread, you know, do some breadsticks with cheese on them or something, and they can grab that. And people can just eat as they get hungry. And you've just got the pot of soup sitting there on warm, simmering, and waiting for them to come in and eat. Because when you got a big crowd, let's face it, everybody don't get hungry at the exact same time. Or maybe folks are running around doing holiday shopping or decorating for the holidays or something, and they're coming in and going out. This would be a really good meal for those days because it's hot and it's creamy and it's satisfying, especially with a grilled cheese sandwich or something. But you can see there how pretty that soup is. The little bit of cream in it kind of changes the color just a little bit. It's not super bright. Alex says it's a nice fall orange, and it is. So it's a really pretty soup for fall. It kind of has that fall orange color. And give this one a try. It's an easy homemade soup, and it is absolutely delicious. You'll never go back to canned tomato soup after you've tried this. But here's a little tip. If you are using canned tomato soup and you want a creamy soup, just add the half and half to it, not milk. Do half and half instead of water, and it'll totally change those canned soups. But this is far better, even than the canned soup with half and half. Way better. But the half and half improves the can, trust me. I hope y'all have enjoyed your time here with us. And I want to thank you for joining us in the Hillbilly Kitchen again. I want to thank you all for your continued support and prayers and all the cards. And as usual, all of the cards that I have gotten this week will be in the description of the video. I want to ask you to please click like and subscribe before you leave if you haven't already. And until next time, remember to put God first.